In this lecture, I'm going to show you different ways that you can view your level that can make level design easier depending on the situation. So again, I've mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning again for this lecture. By pressing F11, you can full screen the viewport. This is what Unreal calls immersive mode. And then when you're done, press F11 to leave full screen. Another way you can view your level differently is by changing the view mode. To change the view mode, hover over this button here in the upper left corner of the viewport and click on one of the selections from the menu that appears. Now, a lot of these view modes are for viewing subtle details in regard to lighting that are beyond the scope of this beginner's course, but I did want to go over these first three here, and those are lit, unlit, and wireframe. Lit is the default view mode of the level editor and is for viewing the level with full lighting and rendering, similar to what the player will see in the game. Unlit is for viewing the level without the lighting having any impact on what you see. In essence, this allows you to see the base colors of all objects, without the amount of light or shadow affecting that color. Unlit is also useful for working in levels or areas of levels where the lighting would otherwise be too dark to easily see what you're doing. And then next we have wireframe. So what does that mean? Wireframe isn't just a nickname bullies used to call me in high school. It's also a three-dimensional model in which only the lines and vertices of an object are represented. So wireframe mode in Unreal Engine allows you to see just the edges of the polygons of the objects in your level. This can be helpful for aligning objects, visualizing the overall structure of something, and in general, just giving you a more architectural view of your level. Now, to the left of the View Modes menu is a menu that allows you to change between the default 3D perspective view of the level to an orthographic view of the level. There are several different orthographic views to choose from, but they all share two common traits. The first is that they default to a wireframe view mode, although you can still change the view mode if you want. But the main thing about orthographic views is that they are meant to be a two-dimensional view of your level rather than a three-dimensional view. For example, in the top view, our vision is directly parallel with the z-axis, so it is as if we were looking directly down at our level and only seeing the x and y axes. And in bottom view, we are looking directly up at the level. In the left and right views, we are looking down the x-axis only and seeing the y and z-axes. And in the front and back views, we are looking down the y-axis and only seeing the x and z-axes. So each of the orthographic views has the point of vision coming from a different place, but it will always be directly along an axis, giving you a two-dimensional view. So orthographic views are useful for aligning the objects in your level in just 2 dimensions at a time. And when paired with the wireframe view mode, the idea is to get a 2D architectural view of your level. Now, something you need to know when working in orthographic views is that the navigation is a bit different than the perspective view. When in an orthographic view, holding down the left mouse button and dragging is used for drawing a selection box that you can use to select one or more objects. To navigate, hold down the right mouse button and drag to pan the viewport camera, or hold the left and right mouse buttons down and drag in order to zoom the camera in and out. So left mouse button to select, right mouse button to pan, and both mouse buttons to zoom. Alright, so moving on, another way to change the view of your level is by toggling the various show flags on and off. Show flags are, in essence, these checkboxes here, which tell the editor whether or not to show various types of actors or effects in the viewport. So, for example, if I uncheck the static meshes show flag, all of the static meshes in the level will disappear from the viewport. Now, this doesn't delete the static meshes from the viewport, it only makes them invisible for the time being. And it also doesn't make them invisible in the game, only in the viewport. So if I were to press play now, I would still be able to see them in game. So show flags are useful for temporarily removing some of the clutter from view once your levels start to get complex. And even when they're not complex, sometimes you may have one type of object blocking another type, and it's just easier to temporarily get one out of the way so you can better work with the other type. Now, another feature similar to this is if you press the G key, you can toggle the viewport in and out of game view. When the viewport is in game view, it will hide all actors and icons that are invisible in game. So the player start actor, for example, will be hidden, along with the icons for your light actors, and so on. Game view is meant to show you in the viewport exactly what the player would see from that perspective in the game. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is the viewport options menu. That menu can be found by clicking on this small button all the way in the upper left of the viewport. The first option on the menu is real time, which toggles real-time rendering of the viewport on and off. So for example, you can see that right now these particle effects are being animated and the clouds are moving across the sky. But if real time is toggled to off, you will only see a static image rendered in the viewport. The next option is show FPS. If you don't know, FPS stands for frames per second. So for any type of video, whether film, television, video games, etc., the illusion of movement is achieved by displaying several still images very quickly. Each of these still images is referred to as a frame. So the more images or frames that are displayed every second, the smoother the movement appears to the human eye. So you generally want your frames per second to be as high as possible so that the animations in your game look smooth and crisp. However, the more data that needs to be rendered in any given frame, the longer it will take to render that frame, and the number of frames per second will go down. So for example, using several different complex static meshes with high resolution materials and a lot of complex lighting all at once could be too much for a machine to process quickly and cause it to run at a low FPS during those times. So there's always a trade-off between how good a scene looks at any given moment and how smoothly the game runs. But as a general rule of thumb, you want to try to get your game to run between 30 to 60 frames per second as much as possible. The next option is show stats, which toggles the ability to display statistics in the viewport. With this on, if you go down to stat, you will find a large number of different stats available for display. There are far too many to cover them all, but for example, if I went to the engine category, I could check levels, and that will show me what levels are currently loaded. Checking draw count will display various graphical statistics regarding what is currently being rendered in the viewport at any given time, and so on. Alright, so then the next option, show toolbar, will simply toggle the visibility of these viewport buttons on and off. The next option allows you to change the field of view of the viewport camera, which basically zooms the camera in and out. The far view plane option allows you to hide actors in the viewport if they are a certain distance away from the camera. With this set to 0, it essentially turns the option off. But if you set this to a positive number, then any actors farther from that distance won't be rendered in the viewport. For example, if I set this to 500, the furniture will disappear, and I won't see it unless I get really close. And keep in mind that this only affects the viewport display. It won't affect the rendering of actors when the game is being played. The next option, screen percentage, essentially affects the resolution of the viewport. Lowering this value will lower the resolution, and raising the value will increase the resolution. Alright, so now cinematics and camera shakes won't be covered in the beginner's course, but these options allow you to see those features within the viewport. Alright, and then game view and immersive mode I covered earlier in the lecture. Next is a menu that is used to bookmark viewport camera locations and rotations. It's easiest to just use the keyboard shortcuts, but you can also use the menu if you wish. So to create a bookmark, press Ctrl plus any of the numbers between 0 and 9 on the keyboard, and then to recall the bookmark, simply press that number. So for example, if I like this camera position here, and I want to save it, I can press Ctrl 1, and then I'll move the camera somewhere else, and now I can just press 1 and I'll immediately jump back to the position I saved. Alright, so next, the Create Camera Here option will simply create a camera actor at the location and rotation that the viewport camera is currently in. And then High Resolution Screenshot will open a window allowing you to take a screenshot of what is currently displayed in the viewport. Layouts gives you the option to choose between a variety of pre-made layouts for the viewport. And then finally, Advanced Settings is just another way of getting to the viewport section of Editor Preferences, where you will find many more advanced options for fine-tuning how the viewport functions. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about in this lecture is piloting actors within the viewport. Sometimes it is useful when placing actors, especially camera and light actors, to see from the perspective of the actor itself. This makes it easier to have the actor point at the exact location you want it to point at. For example, if I place a spotlight actor in my level, and I want it to shine directly on my table, I can pilot the spotlight in order to more easily aim it directly at the table. So if I right-click on the light, there will be an option to the right of an airplane icon that will say Pilot Spotlight, and I can click on that to pilot the spotlight. Alternatively, I could have selected the light and pressed Ctrl-Shift-P. Now I can see directly in the direction of the light, so I can more easily have it point at whatever I want. And when I'm finished positioning it, I can come up here and click this button to stop piloting it and return to a normal view. So now I have my spotlight shining directly on my table. And that will conclude the lecture on different ways to view your level.